Darians! Welcome back to Boldly Becoming. As we close out January, I want to take a moment to slow us down, not to rush ahead, but to look back with intention. January didn't push us forward loudly. It didn't demand big announcements or visible wins. January asked something quiet of us. It asked us to choose, to align, to protect, to wait, and to trust presence over performance. And in doing that, we showed up boldly. Our Boldly Becoming this month didn't call us to bulldoze our way into the new year. It called us to show up fully, with awareness, with intention, with our armor on, ready, grounded, and prepared. It reminded us that boldness doesn't always look like speed. Sometimes it looks like restraint, like discernment, like choosing depth over force. So today, we're not just recapping episodes, we're reflecting on who we're becoming because of them. We began January with Choose Life, the daily yes that changes everything. And what stood out to me the most is that choosing life isn't about one bold moment. It's about the small daily yeses, the yes to getting back up, the yes to telling the truth, the yes to choosing alignment even when comfort feels easier, and definitely it feels easier. This episode asks us to look honestly at our patterns. What are we choosing? Where are we choosing? And what is familiar? Because before God asks us to move forward, He asks us to choose intentionally. Now, for me, I've been recognizing more each day that these yeses aren't just about external decisions anymore. They're about me. They're about saying yes to myself. Yes, I am worthy. Yes, I am capable. Yes, I can show up in ways that honor my voice, my purpose, and my calling. I'm saying yes to being bold, not reckless, not rushed, but anchored in my faith, anchored in God. And in this season, choosing life has meant not just believing in the impossible, but living it. Saying yes to the small impossibles, the quiet acts of courage, the daily obedience, the unseen steps, and trusting God with the larger impossibles too. My dreams, my calling, the places where faith requires me to step out fully. January reminded me, and maybe it reminded you too, that choosing life begins within. And when we say yes here, everything else begins to follow. And I am a living witness and testament of that. We then moved into the discipline of alignment when obedience feels uncomfortable. And I've been walking this obedience journey for the past year. It is uncomfortable, but worth it. In this episode, it reminds us of something we don't always like to admit. Alignment is work. It stretches us. It exposes where we've been settling. It asks us to release what feels good in order to embrace what is right. Alignment isn't loud. It's often quiet, internal, and deeply personal. This episode challenged us to sit with the discomfort of obedience, to recognize that alignment doesn't always feel affirming in the moment, but it is always forming something within us. Because when God begins to align us, He often disrupts what we've grown comfortable with. And that disruption isn't punishment, it's preparation. For me, this season of alignment has required something deeper. It required me to get out of a box. And guys, my box was getting entirely too small. Alignment hasn't just challenged my choices, it has literally and physically stretched me. And honestly, it is still stretching, but in the most amazing ways. This season has taught me that alignment isn't always linear. It's not just about staying on a straight path or checking the right boxes. Sometimes alignment asks us to step outside of what feels familiar, outside of old frameworks, old identities, old limitations. And what I've learned is that this kind of alignment keeps me grounded without keeping me stuck. It pulls me out of a self-centered mindset and anchors me in something bigger. Not just what I see, not just what I understand, but what God sees, even when I can't. Alignment in this season has meant trusting God's perspective over my own, believing that what feels unfamiliar may actually be where growth is happening, and allowing myself to be shaped beyond my comfort, beyond my assumptions, and beyond what I thought alignment was supposed to look like. Now, we moved fast through January. Can you believe it? We're almost at the end. But we moved into holy boundaries, protecting the garden of your becoming. And this episode invited us to look at boundaries differently, not as walls, not as punishment, and not as rejection, but as protection. Holy boundaries reminded us that when God begins to grow something in us, it becomes our responsibility to guard it. Boundaries aren't about shutting people out, they're about keeping purpose intact. They are how we say, this matters too much to leave unprotected. This episode challenged us to ask some honest questions. What am I allowing access to that no longer aligns with who I'm becoming? What conversations, habits, or expectations are quietly draining what God is cultivating? Because not everything that is familiar is meant to have continued access. Not everything familiar is meant to have continued access. I'm saying that again for the people in the back and myself again. For me, this season of boundaries has been less about distance and more about discernment. It's been about recognizing what deserves my energy and what no longer does. I've learned that boundaries don't make me rigid, they make me clear. Clear about my values, clear about my priorities, and clear about space that God is asking me to protect. And here's what stood out to me the most. When we set holy boundaries, we aren't just protecting ourselves, we're honoring the work God is doing within us. We're saying yes to growth by being intentional with access. So let me ask you, what have you been called to protect in this season? What boundary is helping you stay aligned with who you are becoming? Because January, it reminded us that growth requires guarding, and protecting your garden is part of faithful stewardship. Now, we moved quickly into another episode. It's almost one of my favorites now, when Stillness speaks, the power of waiting well. And this episode met many of us in a quieter place, a place where progress wasn't obvious, where answers weren't immediate, where movement slowed or seemed to stop altogether. Stillness asked us to sit with what we often try to rush past. This episode reminded us that waiting is not passive. Waiting is active trust. It's choosing obedience without a timeline, without guarantees, without needing constant confirmation. For me, stillness feels like stepping into paradise. It's like being able to breathe fresh air again. And maybe that's the introvert in me, the part of me that hears most clearly when everything else quiets down. Stillness is where my spirit understands it best. Being still has become a practice for me, a continued practice, a reminder that productivity is more than just doing. It's also rest, it's awareness, and it's intuitiveness, it's presence, it's learning how to wait and still accept the waiting. Even when want to know what's next, I don't always know what's next, and you won't either. And what I've learned is this: stillness doesn't mean nothing is happening. It means something deeper is being formed. Roots are growing. Clarity is developing. Faith is being strengthened beneath the surface. This episode challenged us to rethink how we measure progress, not by speed, not by visibility, but by faithfulness, by how we show up when there's no applause, when there's no immediate outcome, when all we can do is trust. So let me ask you, where did life feel quiet for you this month? How did you respond to the waiting? Because January reminded us that stillness isn't empty, it's intentional. And learning to wait well is part of becoming. Now, along with that episode that y'all just heard literally this week, came with a bonus: Lazarus and the Power of Presence. This reflection invited us to slow down even more and reconsider how we define calling, purpose, and significance. We asked a simple but weighty question. Why wasn't Lazarus one of the 12? And instead of rushing to answer it, we allowed the question to teach us. We saw that Lazarus wasn't overlooked, he wasn't forgotten, and he wasn't less important. He was loved deeply, intentionally, without performance. This bonus reminded us that being close to Jesus was not a consolation prize. It was the calling. Lazarus was trusted with presence, with proximity, with remaining. And that reframed so much for us because January had already taught us how to choose, how to align, how to protect, and how to wait. And Lazarus showed us why all of that still matters, even when our lives feel quiet. This episode invited us to name our own Bethanies, the space where we are safe, known, and allowed to rest. For some of us, that's family. For others, close friendships. For some, therapy. For some, solitude. And for others, creative spaces where we can simply be. And January reminded us that those spaces are not insignificant. They are sacred. The Lazarus reflection also challenged how we think about scale. Maybe you're not called to have a large circle, but a few deep aligned relationships. Maybe your business isn't massive, but it's trusted and steady. Maybe your calling isn't visible, but lives are being changed quietly through your faithfulness. That's not small, that's impact. The bonus episode gently affirmed presence has purpose. Faithfulness has weight, and remaining is sometimes the most courageous work we can do. And when we place Lazarus alongside the rest of January, we see the full picture, choosing life, aligning when it's uncomfortable, protecting what's growing, waiting without rushing, and trusting that presence still matters. As we close, I want us to pause one last time, not to evaluate ourselves, not to critique what we did or didn't do, but to honor what was formed. January didn't rush us, it rooted us. We chose life, not once, but daily. We leaned into alignment even when it stretched us. We protected what God was growing within us. We learned how to wait without walking away, and we were reminded that presence itself has purpose. That matters. January asked us to redefine boldness, not as speed, not as noise, not as force, but as faithfulness, as showing up with intention, with discernment, with our armor on, not defensive, but prepared. January taught us that becoming doesn't always look like movement. Sometimes it looks like staying, like remaining, like trusting God when the next step isn't clear yet. So before you step into February, I want to invite you to do one simple thing. Name a word for January, not a goal, not a task, not a resolution, a word beneath the surface. And as we move into February, the work doesn't stop, it softens. If January was about choosing, aligning, protecting, and waiting, February invites us into receiving, remembering, and healing. We'll explore what it means to be loved well, not by earning it, not by proving ourselves, but by allowing care to meet us without apology. We'll honor the love that came before us, the prayers, the sacrifices, the unseen hands that carried us long before we had a language for gratitude. We'll talk about healing the seeds we've inherited, interrupting cycles, tending to generational pain, and choosing to cultivate something different for the future. And we'll root ourselves in worth, wisdom, and worship, remembering who we are and whose we are. February will also hold a special offering, a collective love letter to the ones who paved the way, because none of us became alone. So if January helped you slow down, February will help you open your hands. Thank you for walking through this month with me. Thank you for choosing depth over speed. Thank you for allowing yourself to become. Without rushing the process, I will meet you in February. So until next time, stay grounded, stay aligned, and keep becoming boldly. Talk to you soon.